Looking for something to read? Well, these are the books that I've written. Hop on down to the description to find the Amazon links for all 4 of them, and keep your eyes open for more in the future. With that said, on to the video. Hello ladies and gentlemen, I'm the Omni viewer, and there was recently an interview posted on Sci-Fi Japan with Hiroyuki Seshita, who, as you all know, is directing GAMERA REBIRTH, and previously was one of the 3 creative giants, I guess you could call them, behind the Godzilla Polygon trilogy. Now, there has been some debate in the fandom ever since it was revealed that he was absolutely directing GAMERA REBIRTH, because the Polygon trilogy has gone down in history as perhaps the absolute bottom of the barrel for the whole Godzilla series. It's generally considered to be one of the worst. It has some very ardent defenders, but both of them are pretty much outnumbered by everyone else. So, naturally, there's been some concern about him directing GAMERA REBIRTH. I read the interview, and I've decided to give my own thoughts on what he says. Now, naturally, there's some stuff in there about, like, what his process is, what he set out to try doing, if he has a favorite monster from the roster or something. But in particular, there are certain elements where he talks about being an actual fan and what it was like working on the Godzilla movies versus working on the Gamera series and things like that. Those are the areas I want to zero in on because I think they might tell us the most about whether or not we should be concerned or possibly hopeful for the series. Seshita basically said that he originally got together with Gen Urobuchi and Kobun Shizuno, and they wanted to make a Godzilla that they had never really seen before, which is partly why they wanted to do it as anime. So they went to Toho with their idea, and they specifically, according to him at least, envisioned it as almost sort of a pro-wrestling kind of thing, because they really wanted to put an emphasis on Godzilla going toe-to-toe with a bunch of opponents. They didn't specify which opponents in this interview, and also bear in mind, the interview itself is sometimes him speaking in English and sometimes him being translated. So keep all of that in mind as we're moving forward. Anyway, he wanted to do that idea, but then he claimed that Toho, the executives at Toho, are the ones that shot it down. They had a very particular idea of what kind of Godzilla they wanted to see, and that wasn't it. So they told him, you have to make a Godzilla like this. Later on, he also says, when comparing his experiences, that Toho certainly had more restrictions on what they allowed him to do. They gave him a much bigger budget than the Gamera series, but they also had a very specific pre-planned idea of what kind of Godzilla they wanted to be in this movie, and he had to stick to that. Whereas with Gamera Rebirth, he had a lower budget, but he was also allowed a lot more creative control. In fact, he actually took the deal because Katakawa approached him. Again, this is based on what he's saying. And he basically said, as long as it's not hard science fiction and I can do the fun pro wrestling kind of stuff, I'm in. And they said yes. So he had more creative freedom. He had to work within the budget, but otherwise he was allowed to do whatever he wanted. Now, there's another individual who has worked with both Gamera and Godzilla, Shusuke Kaneko. He directed the Heisei Gamera trilogy, and he directed GMK. And based on interviews I have heard with him, what Mr. Seshita says actually checks out. Kaneko has actually said that GMK had a much bigger budget than any of the Gamera movies he made, but it also basically had less time to actually make it, and there were certain things that the studio basically said he had no choice but to do. For example, most infamously, the original vision of GMK was supposed to feature Varan and Anguirus, but they were dropped at Toho's insistence that he use Mothra and King Ghidorah instead. Meanwhile, on the Heisei Gamera movies, the budget was lower, but he was allowed greater creative control, and he said that that particular scenario is the one he would prefer if given the choice. So that does kind of line up with what Hiroyuki Seshita is saying in his interview. Even though at this point Gamera has switched companies, he's no longer at Daiei because I think Dai might have actually gone under a while ago. I don't know. I probably should have looked it up before doing this, but whatever the case, Gamera's at Kadokawa now, and Kadokawa, all the same, basically took the same approach. Sure, here's the turtle, do whatever you want with him. That could mean that Kadokawa just doesn't care, or it could mean that they know an opportunity when they see it. Anyway, if you read between the lines, you get the sense that Seshita is saying that the way the Polygon movies turned out is not entirely his fault. Or at least that's what he wants to put forward. He's saying that he had a particular idea of what he wanted to do because he likes Godzilla, he likes Gamera, he likes kaiju in general, and he wanted to make this really big, action-packed, fun epic, but instead he was saddled with something that was just kind of a very dour, hard sci-fi that had its head up its own butt, and, well, you know how the Polygon movies turned out. Anyway, he's saying that, but does that actually line up with what he said when the movies were new? See, this is where I find myself a bit conflicted, because I don't want to assume the worst in anybody, but I also know what I've witnessed in the past versus what I'm being told now. It's worth noting that Seshita doesn't make any retractions in his interview. He doesn't say he rejects the Godzilla movies. He doesn't say that he regrets saying the traditionalist line or anything. But at the same time, you can still infer that he didn't want to make the movies the way they turned out. And he does still claim to be a fan. I don't necessarily think I should question that, but I don't know, it's still kind of odd to think about. Is there a way to actually rationalize this contradiction? That, I think, is the main question. And I do think there is. There are many movie directors throughout history that have made some real stinkers, even though they stood by those stinkers when they were brand new. But years have passed, and after a little time has gone by, they might come forward and say, yeah, that wasn't the movie I wanted to make at all. Mistakes were made, meddling happened, it just was a bad experience. That can happen. We've seen it happen, in fact, with the 2019 Hellboy, with the Josh Trank version of Fantastic Four. It happens a lot. Well, maybe not a lot, but you do know when it happens. And sometimes it just takes a little time for there to be that separation. But the reason, of course, that people will stick by it at the beginning is because, well, it's their job. Their work and their ability to keep working depends on whether or not what they made sells. So what are they going to do? Say, no, this is terrible, don't go and see it, spend your money on something else? Of course they're not going to say that. That's for talking heads on the internet like me to do. The people who actually make the work are going to stand by it, and they're going to want you to see it. Even if it's still not going to do that well, they're hoping that at least there's a chance that it will make back some of its money. So, naturally, he's going to stand by it in the moment. With the passage of time, he could very well change his mind. He could look back on it and say that he does regret it, or that it wasn't really what he wanted to do. And now that he's separated from it, he can actually have the freedom to say, yeah, I had a vision for these Godzilla movies, and that's not what actually happened. But then again, that's just me interpreting things. I don't necessarily want to put words in this guy's mouth, but I do think there is that possibility. But then again, the possibility exists that he's doing the exact same thing with Gamera Rebirth. Gamera Rebirth could very well be a huge bomb. We already know the animation isn't quite what it should be, especially with those human characters, although the monster stuff I think still looks better, at least. But anyway, it could still be bad, but he's going to be standing by it anyway because he still wants people to see it. In fact, interestingly enough, he says that if Rebirth is successful, it could lead to more live-action Gamera, and that Seshita himself has ideas for potentially 10 Gamera movies. That's what it says. Now, I mean, that's kind of like dangling a carrot in front of us, I realize. But, you know, it could still be a sign that he really does care. I don't know at this point. I'm torn. I know how bad the Polygon movies turned out. I know what failures they were, and I know what Seshita, Urobuchi, and Shizuno said in conjunction with promoting them. I also know what Seshita is saying now. And it seems like he's trying to drum up some goodwill. Does he deserve it, though? That's the question. I don't necessarily want to say outright that he doesn't. I mean, like I said before, any director can make a bad movie. Even the best directors, they still have at least one movie in their entire filmography that isn't quite on the same level as everything else. Every single one of them. Then, of course, you have some directors who are the inverse, where they keep producing a whole bunch of bad content, then they suddenly make this one thing that's amazing, and then they go right back into making garbage. Or you have directors that are somewhere in between, where sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's okay, sometimes it's great, sometimes it's terrible, sometimes it's back to okay again. I really don't know. Honestly, I don't know. But I do know that I want to be helpful. Let me specify. I want to be hopeful, but I don't want to be blindly optimistic. I do think there is potential for Gamera Rebirth to be really good. I mean, it can't possibly be as bad as the Polygon movies, or at least I hope to God it's not. But at the same time, I'm just not sure. Like I said, I don't know at this point. The interview is putting forward some things that do make me think maybe there is reason to hope. Maybe there is reason to think that it'll turn out okay. But I really don't know. And the only way we will know is once we actually see it. And who knows when that'll be. We still don't actually have a release date at this point, at least not when I last checked. But time will tell. Anyway, I'm just rambling now, so what do you guys think? I'll provide a link to the article down in the description if you haven't read it yet. Do you think that maybe Seshita really did have his hands tied by Toho, and this is his chance to show what he really can do? Or do you think he's just continuing to kind of string people along? I don't know, like I said, so I'll open the floor to you guys. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. Thank you all for watching. If you want to see us keep doing what we're doing, you might consider doing all the usual YouTube things, as well as hopping down to the description to find links to DeviantArt, Patreon, Twitter, and links for the different books in the Tales from the Omni Vault universe. Your support is naturally appreciated. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.